Hello, everyone, and welcome back to today's episode of the Bible, Your Biography Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Lynna. For those of you who don't know me, I teach on Neville Goddard's work and states of consciousness, and that includes scripture. And every character, person, place, number, pattern, etc. within scripture as it represents a state of consciousness and a pattern unfolding within each and every individual. So today I'm going to talk about Cain. And Cain is the personification of the state of consciousness that believes it must earn. So today we're continuing the exploration of Scripture, as we will continue to do, as the biography of consciousness by looking at one of the most familiar, yet perhaps one of the most misunderstood figures in the Bible, and that is Cain. And I will use that term probably every episode. One of the most misunderstood, because all of Scripture is misunderstood for the most part, because there are very few people, I believe, that understand Scripture in the way that it can be understood based on certain experiences that occur when you go through spiritual awakening, and more specifically, having the experience that Neville Goddard spoke about of the promise and awakening as consciousness itself. It is a remembering. It's a remembrance of this pattern unfolding within you. Your consciousness having put itself within in a profound state of sleep, if you will, right? Personified as Adam, the first identity, to have this human experience and then one day awaken again, remembering itself. So you are consciousness, having a human experience, and every person, place, individual, same thing, pattern, event, everything within Scripture represents a state of consciousness that you move through in your experience. So, for thousands of years, Cain has been remembered as the first murderer, right? Because he killed his brother Abel. His story has often been reduced to a lesson about jealousy, anger, and the consequences of violence. While those themes are certainly present on the surface of the narrative, they do not explain why this account occupies such a significant place so early in Scripture. As we've discovered throughout the series so far, the Bible is revealing far more than historical events. It is revealing the movements of consciousness. Every person represents a state of consciousness that you move through. Every interaction reveals a relationship between states of consciousness. Every event describes something continually taking place within us. So Cain is not merely someone who lived long ago. Cain is a state of consciousness that every human being has occupied at one point or another. Because our consciousness, having experiences, occupies all of the states. We play every part. So until we recognize Cain within ourselves, we cannot understand why this story was written. Not truly. We can understand by what we were told in the church, which I believe that too at one point. And it was important at a certain point on my journey right? We don't come across information by accident. We move through states of consciousness. That's simply all it is. That is what we are doing. So there's nothing wrong with believing in Scripture in the way the church teaches at a given point on your journey. But there comes a time, and it may happen for you sooner rather than later. But there comes a point when you awaken as consciousness itself and understand your creation, why you created, the experience of being human, and all of the projections on the outer world as experiences of consciousness. I know it sounds like such a grand idea, but it's, consciousness. Think of it. Unlimited. Right? It's really an incredible story. You are an incredible story being told through consciousness. Think about that. And everything you experience in your life is an incredible story being told by you. So, the Hebrew name Cain is Qayin. I have no idea how to pronounce it. It is connected with the Hebrew verb ganah, Ganah, meaning to acquire, to obtain, to possess, or to gain. Even Eve's words at his birth reveal the symbolism. I have gotten a man from the Lord, Genesis 4:1. The emphasis is not simply on birth. The emphasis is on acquisition, obtaining, possessing. Immediately, Scripture introduces us to a state of consciousness whose orientation is outward. And that is the point, right? Adam, the first identity. Eve, the creative aspect of man, the creative aspect of the first identity that consciousness embodied, identified with. And now, Eve gave birth to Cain, that first state of consciousness, right? Of one who acquires, possesses, or gains, right? Obtaining something, possessing something. One who seeks to acquire something or seeks to possess something, right? So think about your own life, where sometimes we think we will be complete through what we gain. So this becomes the defining characteristic of Cain, that state of consciousness. He believes fulfillment is something that must be earned, accumulated, or achieved. Now, I'm going to take a moment and mention something because the question may come up. Well, who knew all of this? Who wrote the Bible, right? Who wrote the Bible and actually knew that all of these events and people were states of consciousness, right? So granted, there were authors who wrote the Bible, having their own experiences, dreams, spiritual downloads, etc. But consciousness left itself clues, and I did a video on this on my channel at LynnaKTeer. Consciousness left itself clues. The Bible and the stories within the Bible being a clue for you to experience, you to come across at given points on your journey. You either believe or you don't believe, or you believe, or you don't believe, then you believe, and then you awaken as consciousness itself. You remember that you are consciousness itself, having this human experience, and then you read the Bible, and then the biography is revealed to you, the pattern is revealed to you through your own spirit, your own consciousness. So, if Adam represents awareness, that first identity, and Eve represents the creative faculty of imagination, Cain represents the identity that becomes separated from its own source and attempts to establish itself through effort. I'm going to say that again. Cain represents the identity that becomes separated from its own source, creative aspect within you, God within you, and attempts to establish itself through effort. It is the state that says, I will become worthy. I will prove myself. I will earn acceptance. I must achieve before I can be enough. How many of us have lived from this state? Perhaps not with those exact words, but with the feeling behind them. It is the state that believes that life must be conquered, must be created, must be built, that love must be earned, that success creates value, that identity depends upon accomplishment. This is Cain. This is the state of consciousness within you, personified as Cain in Scripture. Now notice Cain's occupation. Genesis tells us Cain is a tiller of the ground. A tiller of the ground. Abel is a keeper of sheep. Again, Scripture is speaking symbolically. Throughout the Bible, the ground frequently represents the objective world, the realm of visible experience. Cain devotes himself to cultivating appearances. His attention remains focused upon external results. He works the field. He labors over conditions. He depends upon effort. This does not suggest that work itself is wrong. Rather, it reveals a state that believes effort is the source of life. Contrast this with Abel. A shepherd guides living things. His work concerns life itself rather than merely cultivating the external field. These are certainly two entirely different orientations of consciousness. One begins within, the other depends upon without. Eventually, both bring offerings to God. Cain offers the fruit of the ground. Abel offers the firstlings of his flock. And we'll talk about Abel in the next episode. So many readers may ask why God accepted one offering and rejected the other. Was God showing favoritism? Was one gift objectively better? Scripture suggests something far deeper. God is not evaluating produce. God is revealing states of consciousness. An offering represents the state from which consciousness approaches reality. Cain's offering comes from labor, from effort, from acquisition, from the belief that external accomplishment secures acceptance. Abel's offering comes from life itself, from trust, from inward alignment. The difference is not agricultural, the difference is psychological. One state believes it must earn, the other rests in the relationship with oneself, with God, with consciousness itself. This is remarkably consistent with Neville Goddard's teaching that consciousness is the only reality. Neville continually reminded us that manifestation never originates in effort. It originates in identity. The outer world reflects the state already occupied. Cain reverses the order. He believes changing the outer world will establish the inner self. He attempts to become through doing. But Scripture continually teaches the opposite. You do because you first are. Identity precedes expression. State precedes manifestation. And being precedes doing. This explains why Cain becomes angry when his offering is not accepted. His entire identity depends upon external validation. When the result disappoints him, the state begins to collapse. How often does this happen within us? We imagine that achieving the goal will finally make us enough. We believe the relationship will complete us. The promotion will validate us. The recognition will establish our worth. When those expectations are threatened, frustration appears. Not because circumstances changed, but because our identity depended upon them. God then asked Cain a remarkable question. Or not in, but a remarkable question. Why are you angry? Why has your countenance fallen? Notice that God does not condemn Cain. Instead, he invites awareness. Every question God asks throughout Scripture is an invitation to self-recognition. God already knows. Your consciousness already knows. The individual does not. Awareness begins transformation. You forget to have the opportunity to remember, to awaken, to transform. So awareness begins transformation, not judgment. Then comes one of the most psychologically profound statements in Genesis. If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. Sin means doubt. I'm going to say that again. Sin means doubt. Much of Christianity has interpreted this as moral instruction, that if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin or doubt lies at the door. If you do not do well, it is because you doubted. Yet the Hebrew word translated as sin is chatath. You can look up the words if you'd like. Derived from the verb chata, meaning to miss the mark. You missed the mark. What are you creating? What are not creating, but what are you desiring to manifest in your life? Do you doubt? You have missed the mark. Missing the mark is not primarily moral failure. It is misidentification. Are you identifying with external circumstances rather than your internal being, your internal state of consciousness? The creative aspect within you known as Eve. God, your own imagination. Or are you identifying with the external? It is simply, missing the mark is simply occupying the wrong state. It is forgetting who you are. Sin in the symbolic sense is consciousness believing itself to be separate from its own source. The state of Cain continually misses the mark because it seeks identification where identity can never be found. In achievement, in possession, in comparison, in external success. This naturally leads to comparison with Abel. Comparison is inevitable. Because remember, and I mentioned this in the last episode, duality exists everywhere, with polarity exists. So within consciousness, that is, and it exists to observe and to recognize that duality exists, right? Because there's balance, right? Seeking the state of balance, it seems like we're continually doing. So there must be duality, there must be polarity, opposing states, because if there wasn't light, how would you recognize darkness? If there wasn't darkness, how would you recognize light? If you didn't perceive something as good because you recognize evil, right? How would you, if you didn't have good and evil, how would you, that perception of good and evil? Because it really does not, it's your perception. You give meaning to what you experience. But you see what I'm saying? Duality in everything. So comparison is inevitable whenever identity depends upon the acquisition of something. The moment fulfillment becomes something to obtain, everyone else becomes either competition or confirmation. So think about your own life. So say, for instance, you seek to be wealthy and you go on to YouTube or Instagram and you see images of people who are wealthy talking about wealth. So you are either going to think of them as competition. You don't have this, they do, right? So now you're in this weird competition to gain something because someone else has it. Or it can be confirmation. Wealth is possible. Wonderful that that person has wealth. It's showing me that it's possible. I don't need to compare myself to them. I don't need to be in competition with anyone else. That is simply showing me that it's possible. Again, I go back to consciousness left itself clues. Your consciousness left yourself clues to see what is possible. So this is why comparison is never merely just emotional. It is structural. It belongs to a particular state of consciousness. Now, eventually, Cain kills Abel. Historically, this appears as murder. Psychologically, it represents something happening within consciousness. The state rooted in effort attempts to eliminate the state rooted in trust. The false self always feels threatened by the possibility of fulfillment, or the possibility that fulfillment has never depended upon achievement. Why? Because if identity already exists within consciousness, then the entire foundation of Cain begins to dissolve. The striving self cannot survive the recognition that nothing essential has ever been missing. How often do we witness this within ourselves? The old identity resists surrender. It argues, it defends itself. So say you are wanting to shift into a new identity, one from poverty to wealth. That old identity resists that surrender. It argues, it defends itself, it wants to hold on because that is what feels natural and comfortable, that state of lack. Comfortable until it doesn't feel comfortable. It insists there must be something more to accomplish before peace can finally arrive. Yet every spiritual tradition ultimately points in the same direction. Peace is discovered, not manufactured. Identity is remembered, not earned. This is why Neville emphasized entering the state of the wish fulfilled, or rather than struggling toward it. You do not become worthy after manifestation. You manifest because you occupy the state of worthiness. The order matters. Cain lives from becoming. The awakened individual lives from being. After Abel's death, God again asks a question. Where is Abel, your brother? And Cain responds, am I my brother's keeper? Give me 1 sec, I'm going to take a drink. On the surface, this sounds like evasion. Psychologically, however, it reveals something profound. States of consciousness are intimately related. The state that you occupy determines the experience you perceive. You cannot separate yourself from the state living within you. You are, in every moment, the keeper of your own consciousness. Whatever state that you nourish eventually governs your experience. Whatever state that you neglect gradually disappears from awareness. Cain believes he can deny responsibility. Yet consciousness cannot escape itself. Eventually, Cain becomes a wanderer. This wandering is deeply symbolic. A consciousness seeking fulfillment outside itself never arrives. And give me one moment, because that phrase, whatever state you neglect gradually disappears from awareness. That one kind of hit me. Okay, so keep that in mind. Where was I? Okay, so I forgot where I was at. Okay, so consciousness, right? Seeking fulfillment outside itself never arrives. There's really always another achievement, correct? Another possession, another goal, another identity to pursue. So rest continually remains just beyond the next accomplishment. And by rest, I mean, so if we think about the Sabbath as it relates to manifestation, right? You go into your imagination. Imagine what you desire. You plant that seed and you imagine until it feels natural. Then you drop it and you rest. That is the seventh day. That is the Sabbath, the day of rest. Not necessarily 7 days, but the state of rest. But if you're continually looking to possess something, to own something, to reach another goal, to take on another identity, another achievement, then rest doesn't happen. It continually remains beyond what's next. So many people spend decades wandering through this state. Wandering. Walking in the wilderness. So they spend decades wandering through this state without recognizing its own source. That is why the journey through the wilderness took 40 days. Not because, so this is not because people lack success, right? That this wandering occurs, but because success cannot provide what only identity can. So the beautiful message hidden within Cain's story is that this state is not permanent. Scripture is never written to condemn. It is written, or was written rather, continually being written if you look at it. Psychologically, as a pattern unfolds within you, it is written to awaken. The moment awareness recognizes the state, then freedom becomes possible. The moment you recognize you are in a state of lack, a state of unworthiness, a state of not feeling successful. The moment you recognize that, then freedom becomes possible because you are aware you are in a state And then you can shift into a more desirable state by changing your assumptions, changing your identity. And changing your identity, who do you choose to identify with? Do you choose to identify with the state of lack? Are you going to continue with the habits that belong to that identity? Or are you going to decide that you are going to shift into the state of consciousness of wealth and embody that identity? So within that identity of being wealthy, who would you be? How would you move throughout your day? You begin seeing the subtle ways that you have attempted to earn what has always belonged to you. You notice how often you've sought external confirmation before allowing yourself to feel whole. You begin recognizing that consciousness itself has always been complete. Then striving gradually gives way to naturalness. I am this. It is done. So effort gives way to embodiment. Acquisition gives way to realization. Life is no longer approached as something to conquer. It becomes something through which consciousness expresses its own completeness. Perhaps this is why the story of Cain immediately follows the account of Adam and Eve. The moment that consciousness forgets its true identity, the next state naturally appears. The state that believes fulfillment must be obtained. The state that seeks life through acquisition. The state that mistakes becoming for being. Yet Scripture gently invites us beyond Cain, not by condemning him, but by revealing him. Because once a state is seen clearly, it no longer unconsciously governs us. As we conclude today's episode, I'd like to leave you with a question for contemplation. Where in your own life are you still trying to earn what consciousness has already given you? Where have you mistaken achievement for identity? Where have you believed that the next accomplishment will finally allow you to become enough? And what might change if you began, not from striving toward fulfillment, but from the quiet recognition that your true identity has never been absent? Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Bible, Your Biography Podcast. Until next time, just remember that every character in Scripture is revealing a movement within consciousness. And as you recognize these movements within yourself, then the Bible ceases to be merely a record of the past. It becomes a living story of your own awakening. So if this is your first time joining me here on the podcast, if you check out my other podcast, the Mindset Manifesting podcast and the Journey of Awakening podcast, and even the Neville Goddard lectures, this will really help tie everything together for you. If that is something that you're interested in, it should help make this make more sense. And you can also check out my YouTube channels, LynnaKTeer and the Neville Goddard lectures. All right. I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye now.